All right, everyone, welcome to the open quarterfinal rounds of NUDC 2024. In this particular round, we would have Brawijaya as opening government, Universitas Indonesia as opening opposition, Politeknik Negeri Batam as closing government, and Universitas KRISTEN Petra as closing opposition. Before we start, I would like to introduce to the room my lovely panelists, starting from Ms. Rakyan.
Hi guys, my name is Rakyan from Universitas Gajah Mada, wishing everyone best of luck.
Hi everyone, my name is Arya from Universitas Telkom. Good luck everyone.
Hi everyone, I'm William from STWPA. All the best.
Hi, I'm Matthew from Atmaja Yogyakarta. Wish you all the best and let's have some fun.
Fantastic. My name is Jane. I'll be your chairperson today. Before we start, very short housekeeping because we do have an array of audience. Please do not go in and out of the room during the off at all times, and that because this room is live streamed, it's not necessary for you to take pictures, so let's just prohibit from taking any documentation. And for teams, please make sure that you use your mic when offering POIs and make sure that your mic is on before you start your speech, because again, this room is live streamed so that we can hear the voice. Right, so I believe that is all the housekeeping we need. So without any further ado, I would like to welcome the Prime Minister to start this round. Here.
What we want to propose in this debate as opening government is simple. Therefore, several points are set up. One, we do think that JCPOA exists. We think that not only because of the interest of the USA, but also we want to propose to you why then this JCPOA should exist and reinstated, because of for the sake of developing for the sake of reducing the destruction that will be happening around the world, right? But also two, we will also extend as to why then at the end of the day through this reinstatement it will be very effective in terms of explaining why then Iran's compliance will be likely to happen at the end of the day, right? But also, yeah, one point of framing. We think that USA and Iran have always been a traditional enemy in the international relations. It means when Iran wants to develop nuclear program as their weapon, it means it will challenge the power of the USA, for example, as the global hegemonic of this world, right? But also two, we think that this has a lot of things to do with how then this global hegemony will conduct in this world, right? Therefore, when Iran wants to develop nuclear program, it will challenge the power of USA, not only for the sake of the material weapon only, but how then through nuclear weapon, Iran could alleviate themselves as the regional power in the Middle East, therefore challenging the interests of the USA in the Middle East at the end of the day, right? But I think the status quo is very problematic already. Why? Because through development of nuclear program, it allows Iran to further develop other weapons, which is something very dispreferable. We will prove that in this debate. But also too, we think that through this nuclear program, it will result in destruction because of the characteristic of Iran's tendency to always be the regional power in the Middle East through so much interference in other countries. We will prove to you why then that very thing is problematic. Therefore, USA should reinstate JCPOA to prevent Iran to be the regional power in order to prevent any destruction, and we will prove to you why then this is likely through explanation why then Iran will likely comply. OG is burdened to explain why then this is for the sake of decreasing the destruction that will happen around the world. Our position is to defend why then if this JCPOA is not reinstated, Iran as a country will not be impoverished through the economic sanction that will also be likely to happen, but also too, why then if if there is no reinstatement of this program JCPOA, why then, at the end of the day, destruction will be less likely to happen for the sake of everyone's livelihood, right? I have one contribution in my speech. Why then the reinstatement is good in and of itself. Layer one, what is the interest that needs to be realized in this debate? We propose to you, as opening government, we want to decrease the destruction happening around the world. We want to reduce conflicts that will result in destruction happening in the Middle East and all around the world. But we will explain to you why then destructions can happen in the first place, due to two reasons. One, we think that Iran is an authoritarian country due to the characteristics of the government, which is too much centralized in the, for example, the supreme leader, for example. Therefore, due to this authoritarian characteristic, for example, one, they will tend to keep developing the power as much as possible. It will lead to a very problematic policy. For example, they will not care as much about the welfare of their own people, but what they care about is only how they can maintain the bargaining power in international relations as much as possible. Therefore, bad impacts to the people of the Iran themselves, right? But also too, through this authoritarian characteristic of Iran, they tend to close off as much information as possible to people and to the world, right? Therefore, they can keep developing this nuclear weapon, for example, without being supervised by any other countries, because they want to disclose and they want to close this information as much as possible. We want to prove to you why then this development of weapon, which tends to corrupt as power tends to corrupt absolutely, right? But also, the second reason as to why then destructions can happen is how then, through this nuclear development program, Iran will be a regional power in the Middle East. But something that you need to keep in mind is how then, if a state, for example, reaches a regional hegemony in a certain region, we will not believe that that very state, for example, will have the interest for the sake of the welfare of every state in that region. But remember, power tends to corrupt, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. We think that state is, at the end of the day, self-interested in terms of their power in the international relations. Therefore, if Iran is a rising regional power, Iran will have the great inclination to interfere with any domestic affairs in the countries of Middle East. This is what happened already in the status quo, right? When Iran is already a very strong rising country, therefore they interfere with any domestic affairs in Yemen. Therefore, due to that reason, Houthi in rebellious organization of Houthi in Yemen can conduct a coup to the government, therefore provide the instability to other countries. We don't want this further destruction to happen, right? But also, layer two, why then this reinstatement is likely for Iran to comply? One, I think this reinstatement also leads to alleviating these economic sanctions to the people of Iran, right? We think that Iran will be rational enough as a state actor to think what is the best policy for their own people at the end of the day, right? We think that this economic sanction will do a lot of harms to people. Therefore, this very economic sanctions will impoverish a lot of people in Iran at the end of the day, right? This economic sanctions also is the very reason why a lot of Iranians will be displaced and become a refugee in other countries. Therefore, provide another spillover problems in the other countries in the region, right? But also, why then Iran is likely to comply within this reinstatement? Because at the end of the day, there will be a collective supervision to Iran. If there is no economic sanction, for example, they will be more involved in the international trade. Therefore, better mechanism of check and balance as to what kind of money that will be allocated for something and something. Therefore, Iran will be more likely, to comply. But then, the other reason is, we think that at the end of the day, due to the fact that Russia and China is the member of this JCPOA, therefore, since they have good bilateral relations to China, to Iran, it means Iran will also listen to them whenever this JCPOA will be reinstated to them, at the end of the day. But also, too, lastly, the reason why Iran is likely to comply, because in the status quo, Iran is pressured by the international relations by a lot of problems, women's issue and human rights issue at the end of the day. Therefore, they want to fix their image in this world. Therefore, we want to propose this motion.
We thank the Prime Minister for their speech. To continue, I would like to welcome the Leader of Opposition. Here.
Unlike OG, I want to properly characterize Iran, right? We think Iran has been characterized as a rogue state with their constant effort to develop nuclear weapons, sponsoring terrorism activities across Middle East, and extreme authoritarian nations. We think in the current status quo, there are lack of incentive from Iran's government to focus on welfare and their citizens' prosperity, and they allocate massive capital to military equipment and security sectors, including sponsoring a lot of belligerent groups across that area, right? We say, even with the existence of JCPOA, Iran has consistently shown patterns of aggressiveness and sponsoring conflicts, secretively developing nuclear weapons, for example. So I think the burden of government bench is to actually prove why Iran will suddenly become a very good boy in their side just because they reinstate JCPOA. We don't understand that explanation coming from Prime Minister, right? But let's take a look at the recent activities and the recent context of Iran, right? There are two things. First, in the specific context of Israel and Palestinian conflicts in 2021, Iran has been funding Hamas to continue in the war with Israel and now also sponsoring Hezbollah with their aggression towards Israel, right? So I think in this particular context, Iran has showed that they want to be the actor that sponsors a lot of groups that involved in the conflicts, that perpetuate the conflicts, widening the conflicts towards other regions, for instance. But second, I think Iran has also become China's front door to assert their geopolitical dominance in Middle East. This year on itself, China and Iran has conducted discussion regarding strengthening agreements, be it political and economic agreements, with Saudi Arabia, which is U.S. second biggest allies in Middle East. So I think based on these two contexts on itself, we already know the characterization of Iran and how Iran sponsors a lot of conflicts, perpetuate a lot of conflict that exists in that region, but also become the front door to trigger more geopolitical tension between U.S. and China in Middle East. I think this is the context that is important to note in this debate, right? We say, by imposing economic sanctions, we're enabling Iran to continue widening the conflicts and tension in the region. Why? Because of two things. First, only economic capability enables Iran to sponsor belligerent groups that perpetuate more conflicts in different areas in Middle East, right? This was like giving weapons, this give the money, trainings towards this kind of people, military helps, for example. Those kind of activities, joint military exercise, for example, those are sponsored exactly because Iran has economic capability to do so. But second, I think economic capital also what made Iran able to focus on strengthening trades to welcome China's investment in the region to begin with. You have to realize that China chose Iran exactly because Iran has an authoritarian system which ensure a political stability because they only have one leader, for example, and they're less likely that like democratic actions from the people to demonstrate towards their leader, right? But this is also because economic stability, right? Because China see Iran as a country with strong economic stability, at least in that region compared to other Middle East countries, right? So I think in that sense, the economic capability of Iran is a very important matrix in the way why China chose Iran, for example, to become their door to enter the geopolitical competition in that region. Why is this bad then? No, we don't want to protect Israel, no, we don't want to protect US, but we say if we let Iran continue using their economic capability to perpetuate aggressiveness in the region, what will happen is two things, right? First, war will be spread even further to other countries, to other Middle East countries, including Iran on itself, the people inside Iran, including Iraq, Pakistan, and so on, right? But second, I think there will be most likely more tension with US because now US see China entering the Middle East very easily. Now they already attracted Saudi Arabia, which is US biggest allies in the region, for example. So this, we can expect more troops that US send to Middle East, for example, because they want to secure their geopolitical dominance in the area, for example. We can see more more grouping, for example, because now US want to, have their own groups because now they see China doing the same thing in the region. This leads more tension, more troops that stand there, more instability, political instability that exists in the region, right? Let's talk about the comparative then. What happened when they actually developed the nuclear weapons, right? Because I think this is the biggest burden that the government branch would want to throw it to us, right? Three things. First, I think when we're talking about the possibility of Iran developing their own nuclear weapon, I think exactly it takes capital for Iran to, significantly develop their nuclear, for example, right? So even though they will start to develop their weapon now because now they're resuming it to our sanction, at the very least, our sanction on itself prevent them to significantly do improvement in their development, for instance, right? So without the massive capital because of our sanction, even if they try to resume the development of nuclear weapon, it won't be significant enough for it to be something, for example, because they lack of capital to do so. But second, it will less likely to be used because it will bring huge harm to Iran. Do realize that there is never any kind of nuclear weapon that is being used since Nagasaki because exactly it's a very hard decision for you to take. It will probably create a lot of retaliation if you actually want to use nuclear weapon, and we know that, US know that, right? So even if Iran, for example, want to develop their nuclear weapon and suddenly they have the capital to do so, for example, we don't think that they will actually use it to hurt people or harm people, right? But I think on the very last reason, I think US and Germany has an even more advanced weapon technology. So even if Iran want to attack US, for example, or attack any US ally, for example, I don't think they will actually want to do it because they know that they're not as advanced as US and they will probably lose in that nuclear war, for example. So I think in terms of developing nuclear weapon, even if that happens, for example, I don't think it will bring any significant impact to the floor, right? But why economic sanction will not harm the people's welfare, like what they told us? First, they have natural resources, so they still can sell their oil, for example, but the delta is, now we don't want to have trades in that, as US, we don't want to have trades, right? Because we have sanctions, for example. So they would most likely can still sell their oils, but they have to sell to other countries, which most likely would not want to pay as much or buy as much, for example. So yes, they will still have capital to provide for their people, for example, because that's the most important thing, because if they don't have people and they don't have anything, so most likely they would want to shift their capital towards military, for example, to capital to actually provide for the welfare of their people. This is the delta and the benefit that we provide to you. Now we push Iran to not care about sponsoring other group. They have to care about using the limited capital to pay for their people, to pay for the welfare, because now it becomes an urgency, right? It's not an urgency in the status quo because they have like more capital to do both, for example, but now we push them to actually do so. Proud to oppose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Leader of Opposition, for the speech. Let's continue. I would like to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
The only way to hold Iran and China accountable is to actually force them to do this agreement and make them being exposed to the Western allies too, so that accountability can actually be ensured within these relations, and this relation is no longer a backdoor politics that only being kept by these two countries. And we think that the check and balances, for instance, for like how to prevent any more spillover effect, for example, like how the internally displaced persons of Iran going to Turkey and going to create massive refugee crisis even in the borderline line of Eurasia to eventually keep being happening, right? The reason why, even with nuclear development programs, Iran is still funding Houthi and eventually pushing Yemen to be one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world because Iran still has the bargaining power from the development of nuclear development. What is exactly the implication of nuclear development program? It is not only the outcome of the nuclear weapon itself, but it is the confidence from bargaining power coming from the implication of having development of nuclear power, because this is one of the that forms your comprehensive power as a military in a nation, and this power is what must be limited in the status quo by the constant check and balance. I think that in status quo, Iran is too skeptic with United States, so if United States keep being aggressive toward Iran in the Middle East, we think that Iran will keep retaliate. This is why Iran is intervening in Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and Iran keep attacking Israel, for instance, and we think that this is something that actually makes things worse in the conflict of the regional proxy in Middle East. Why is that the case? Number one, because we have seen significant process in Israeli-Palestinian conflicts. There are three things here. One, international scrutiny from a lot of people. Like literally, we have seen a lot of snapgrams about all eyes on Rafah. Number two, Palestinian statehood is recognized gradually, and it is even adding Western allies, for instance. And number three, this is also a formal call from International Criminal Court to eventually get Netanyahu, for instance. And I think that Iran's intervention in the current status quo makes things worse. And we think that if United States doesn't have any kind of good cooperation in any kind of form, that is to always keep imposing economic sanction, I think that Iran will eventually just having the interest to eventually retaliate United States constantly in the regional conflict. This way, Iran's intervention will make things worse, and because they continue to attack Israel, and then Israel and United States, for instance, can make more justification to eventually retaliate to Iran as well. I think that this is the devil cycle that will continue in opening opposition's bench, right? But why then imposing JCPOA? Well, where Iran have the economic capability as well, it doesn't mean it will enable Iran to continue. Few reasons to this. Number one, because in the current Iran, that is much more impoverished, but we don't see much exposure because Iran's is really controlled, and there's no means of Western allies that is included in the states. The news of the crisis in Iran is not received well by the world, which means that these things can be kept by secret for currently, but I think that in the long term it will be much more harmful for Iran because Iran will losing human resources. This is bad because Iran values so much of their human resources because they need these human resources for their natural resource, for instance, or even to get to the military, which means that to truly empower these human resources, they need economic capability, which means that if we think that the economic sanction will be likely to be complied, but why then this economic capability will not likely to get to spreading to the world? Few things. Because there will be more check and balances from few actors. One, from the Western allies, we think that the Western allies will likely keep check and balancing more to the Iran in few forms. For instance, the return of so many duta besar to Iran if this JCPOA is actually installed, which means that there will be a direct constant check and balance in the ground as well in the Iran. But number two, there will be also more international scrutiny to Iran, and we think that this is effective. For instance, the case of Mahsa Amini that actually put a lot of interest on how then university students all over Iran also protesting toward their government and actually opening the information to the world, which means that this kind of thing will actually trigger people to actually do this to the government of Iran so that they don't do more interventions. We think that this is effective because international exposure international exposures give a lot of tangible benefits. For instance, on how then the Nobel Prize the Nobel Peace Prize is actually related to the problem of women in Iran that give more bargaining power to the people, which means that people will be likely more incentivized to check and balancing Iran to eventually let Iran to not intervene to the countries, for instance. And number two, this will also on how then a lot of international news will be likely having more scrutiny to Iran because JCPOA will open this to actually happen, right? But why then the trading itself is a very important means here, because the trading is not only about this trading means that there will be a lot of goods that will eventually open the market, in the market itself there will be more people who actually opt in the market, which means that more people from all over the world, for instance, to actually go into Iran and actually can expose the information that actually happening in Iran. So at the very least, even if Iran still have the ambition to become a regional power, for instance, I think that international scrutiny and constant check and balances will be much more important in opening government sides rather than in opening opposition, where you are keep being closed and you are keep being controlled by an authoritarian government. So even if at the very worst case, there is an economic capability that is enough for Iran to trigger another extension, to trigger another wars or conflicts, at the very least, it is oppressed in opening government, and in opening opposition, you will just see constant interventions to Hamas and Houthi and even Hezbollah in Lebanon. That's why I don't see why then their economic sanction is actually going to be limiting this. That's why we're very proud to propose this motion. Thank you.
Okay, we thank you. We thank the Deputy Prime Minister for their speech. I would like to welcome now the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Several points to frame out opening government this debate. Firstly, regarding how they want to avoid refugee and poverty. I think this is a very complicated issue because refugee happens because war exists. So opening government need to prove why war will stop for their benefit to manifest. But Sutra has proven to you that lifting the economic sanction is perpetuating the nuclear development exactly because Iran will have more economic benefit under their side of the house, exactly because they now have trade partner in the USA under the JCPOA, for example, and exactly because now China can easily enter the Iran because the situation is more stable and so on and so forth. So I think instead of stopping the war, they will perpetuate the war. So we don't understand how then refugee and poverty could be a benefit under opening government, right? Because there's no guarantee that tension and war will stop. But secondly, they want to reduce tension and destruction. Exactly. If Iran have the upper hand due to the fact that they're now economically more stable in comparison to the past, for example, and US are obligated to accept Iran as a trade partner through the JCPOA and buy their oil, for example, Iran will have more economic resources, and there is no guarantee that economic resources will be used for the people. Instead, the economic resources will be used for the foreign policy to increase their weaponries development, nuclear development, and so on and so forth, to be used for hostility in the Middle East. This is the worst scenario that we want to avoid under opening opposition, right? But I think they also try to push the burden that retaliation will happen under outside of the house. We don't think retaliation will happen to the worst extent under opening opposition, exactly because if we sanction Iran will be hurt economically, and Iran will care to save their people first, for example, because people are keep pushing the government to help them economically and so on and so forth. But secondly, I think it's not gonna be that worse under opening opposition because they don't have much capital to do so. But But the one thing that make Iran have more capital is because they lifted the sanction under opening government, right? But even if the situation is really worse under our side of the house, exactly because there is an economic sanction, I think it's enough to stop Iran to significantly be hostile due to the fact that they are not really stable under our side of the house. We think it's not going to be significantly comparatively harmful in comparison to opening government side. Now I'm just gonna glorify Sutra case in regards to how, on our side of the house, the situation will not be worse. Lifting economic sanction doesn't necessarily good, because if the vulnerable actors, the people in Iran that you want to champion, we as opening opposition very confidently flip the logic and on how it's gonna be bad under government bench. Simply because firstly, Iran's government right now focus on foreign policy in asserting their hostility towards the Israel, and for example, so the limited resources they give right now are used for defense and weaponry. So imagine the situation is now they have limited resources. So imagine if the economical sanction is lifted and they have more resources, those more resources will be used to even further develop these weaponries and defense under opening government, right? But also imagine if you lift economic sanctions. There are several scenarios that could happen. Firstly, it is uncertain that Iran would stop their nuclear development exactly because their interest is now to have self-defense against, the tension in Israel, for example, in the Middle East. So the economic benefit will go for this, for this self-defense thing. But secondly, they don't trust the United States of America anymore, exactly because the USA have broken the agreement in the past, and Iran is an actor that like to do revenge. So even if they sign, this JCPOA again, it's most probably only going to be performative. So there is no guarantee that Iran will comply to this under their side of the house, right? And the people in Iran or Middle East is not necessarily going to be protected under government side at the end of the day, right? But what is certain under Sutra's argument? If you lift economic sanction, you give more power to Iran, exactly because they don't have to focus on domestic issue anymore, because domestic issue is now, slightly more better because you lifted the economic sanction, their burden is lifted, and they could have freedom to even more focus on developing the nuclear because they don't have to focus on economic issue anymore. But if they have economic sanction, at least we take away their power by creating, we take away their power by not being their, trade partner and so on and so forth. So China or any other FDI will not likely to invest exactly because the situation is not really, ideal in Iran right now, and Iran will not have the ability to accelerate their hostility because we do not give them more resources to develop their weaponries. Because if more resources accumulated and China enter Iran, for example, like what opening government wants to do, the tension will be very higher, and it's just a ticking bomb for an actual bomb to explode in the Middle East because of the lifting economic sanction that they want to do under government bench. So stopping war and making Iranian rich is a very big burden to prove under government bench. So what opposition want is very simple and is very provable under our side of the house. Status quo is the lesser worst condition for people in the Middle East right now, and it's because Middle East will not be accelerated into a nuclear developmental project because this the one thing actor that keeps on insisting developing their nuclear is hurt economically by this economic sanction, and the people could still live because the limited capital that they have right now under opening opposition are used to hush down the domestic economic issue like finding buyer for the oil, for example, focusing on displaced people, focusing on how to treat these displaced people, for example. So the effort of the domestic elevation still exists exactly because there is a problem in the domestic conditions in Iran. But if the domestic condition has no problem at all, then it's gonna be very easy for Iran to focus on foreign policy, very easy for Iran to focus on how to take down Israel and making a very advanced nuclear power and so on and so forth, and just launch the bomb to Israel and so on and so forth. I think if economic sanction is lifted, there is no likelihood at all that Iran will act better under their side of the house. I think closing bench cannot suddenly debating in a daydream beautiful scenarios, exactly because the actor in this debate like Iran, USA, Middle East, Saudi Arabia are not beautiful at all. So we are defending a worst case scenario that is less worse under opening opposition. Because the reason why Iran right now do not interfere with high degree of hostility is exactly because the economic sanction hurt them, and they can only walk in a jogging manner, for example. But government bench treat, if they lifted the economic sanction, they treat Iran's pain. They make Iran not hurting anymore and make Iran, able to be like an Usain Bolt to win the nuclear marathon, exactly because they give Iran more fit to run under government bench. So I think in here we already proved to you why the status quo is, a lesser worse condition for the people in the Middle East, and also why at the end of the day Iran will, not be able to advance their nuclear development under the house. But we also provide to you a comparative benefit, or a comparative harm analysis. Why then, if we lifted the economic sanctions, it will be very worse because we give more power for Iran to, focus on foreign policy. We're very proud to negate.
We have a very short intermission. To start the closing half, I would like to welcome the government member. Here.
Check. Check. Wait. Just give me a couple of seconds. I'll try to prepare my paper. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think opening opposition bench did not realize that currently United States are being kind to Iran because of why? They don't want Iran to be ended up like North Korea, having a lot and massive power of nuclear, but poverty enough to support their society. But this debate is become stagnant on opening opposition because they never really understand what is currently happening in the world. Two characterizations of urgency. Firstly, firstly that I have mentioned before, and secondly, strong military countries in the world, but not limited to Russia, UK, France, or whatsoever country that have nuclear in this current day, did not agree or do not consent from this particular Iran country to have their nuclear ownership under two reasons. Firstly, their internal behavior, or secondly, the background that they have done earlier and from the first place. But however, let's just rebuild and debunk all logical sense. They mentioned something about Trump, right? They mentioned something about Trump did flip this particular idea, but this is the logic thing. Trump did that because it has been imposed for a long time. Iran does not have the money now to develop their the idea of nuclear development. That is why Trump did that at the very end of the day. But secondly, opening opposition never give you a logical explanation on what basis the America and China will suddenly go into war just because they are currently having a problem in trade or international trade or logistics, for example. This is exclusively assumption from opening opposition because we knew, even before we were born, for example, China and America have been competing in international trade and logistics. But however, the most efficient, the most healthy competition that they could do is by negotiation. For example, what did American provide to Arab rather than China? Firstly, it's about the ecosystem of trade, and secondly, it's about more sufficiency in the World Trade Organization. It's eventually become a strong point from America to bring this particular idea. But however, let's just head on to the urgency. Let's just head on to the bad point on why this particular house believe, especially the government house. Firstly, we bring the idea that nuclear is far more dangerous than economic comparison, because at the very end of the day, nuclear could only end up as a Fallout movie that you could probably watch. For example, people could die in a lot of methodologies. But however, this is what opening opposition will never take care about. It's about international tension. This is what have false characterized by opening government. This particular motion is not only talking about USA and Iran, but however other countries that is related, especially when it comes to nuclear. Russia, China just did not have any intent or do not have any consent from this particular Iran to have a nuclear, because at the very end of the day, they just want to fight an economic, and at the very end of the day, because they know that this particular country is very bad at the very first place. But however, let's just head on to the characterization on what is Iran behavior. Firstly, they have martyr behavior. What is martyr behavior? In short, they will never bow to anyone. Three things. Firstly, they are wild. Secondly, they are rebellisms. And lastly, they are no thank you. And the next is about their support terrorism. But however, opening government have mentioned about external activities that they have done. But however, sometimes you need to realize that you need to think clearly that they have two terrorist movement in this particular country. Firstly, ISIS. Secondly, Al-Qaeda, who did 9/11 at the very first place, what the claim by America. This is actually very, very harmful, because at the very end of the day, there is no justification from opening opposition that say that Iran will not support this particular idea, when we realize that the only thing that Iran has as their own gold mine, for example, is military outsources. So there is no justification from the opening opposition at the very end of the day. Secondly, we're talking about power of military here. Why do we think that this is time for Iran to shift away from a military focuses to economic transition? I will be explaining this to my further extension. But however, let's just compare what will be the economic and nuclear bringing up to this particular surface. One, at least at the very end of the day, creating a nuclear war will be more damage rather than creating a competitive environment of economy. At least we are not trying to create a global tension when everyone will eventually, if for the example, Iran focuses more on development, there will be no justification that even Arab, even Israel, even whoever country would like to do a transaction due to the particular idea of they are afraid that this particular money will support them to invent the nuclear. But however, secondly, sanction will not only exclusively burdening Iran country, for example. Because of why? I think this is time for Iran to understand that they have a more potential idea of trade. For example, they have tourism, educational, or even Arab, ASEAN, or even there are other ASEAN countries that could be accessible to their partnership. But however, I believe that the opening bench side of the house concerning about the China and America, this is not actually concerning at the very first place, because at the very end of the day, this particular actor, which is China or even Russia, who will be doing this particular transaction, will help the Iran economic rather than creating a delusional war that they thought it will happen at the very end of the day. I mean, think clearly. What kind of economic competitiveness in the market that could create a war? That's such a silly assumption that they are assuming. But however, let's just head on to the next idea. OOKs we're focusly talking about they are committing or they are scared to this particular idea of war. But we say that this particular idea is not going to happen because of why? Because at the very end of the day, people did that, or people actually not understanding the idea of concerning what is concerning or main point from the Iran itself. For example, they said something about Iran will not only focusing on supporting military, but this is untrue, because at the very end of the day, opening opposition never proposed what kind of economic sector that actually Iran has. But however, our side of the house believe that in this particular current situation, Iran only have military section, for instance. But however, let's just head on to the particular argument that could probably bring up by the next closing oppositions. Some of them might say something about war is very dangerous at the very end of the day. Then they probably try to re-empower or those particular point. But however, we would like to say that war is not only focusing to determine who is strong, but also determined by the amount of victim. They said that Iran will not attack this particular country of America, right? But however, this particular thing will not be happen since they have the martyr behavior, as I have mentioned before. They will not bow under anything. But however, secondly, regarding opening government, what do we think that opening government is actually well, let's just say less focusing. They thought that Iran is only going to focus on weapon. But however, they forget that something about nuclear development could not only limited to weapon, but however, it could only perhaps that Iran would like to build nuclear installation. But however, at the very end of the day, at least you could support Iran by creating more, by make them conscious to realize that there are other externalities, external traits that they could probably have at the very end of the day. So yeah, with that being stated, we would like to propose.
Right, thank you, government member, for the speech. I would like to now welcome the opposition member. Here.
Am I audible? Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels, this debate has been extremely deadlocked because every single one of them has lost sight over what should be the most important goal in the United States Middle East policy. It is not to depower Iran. It is to achieve peace and stability in the Middle East, which is the prerequisite to better humanitarian conditions for Iranians, for the Middle East, and for the world altogether. The flawed analysis here is that both opening benches characterize Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapon as irrational when you see the economic harm. However, we have to analyze, why is it that Iran is so willing to destroy its economy by exiting out of, by continuing to develop nuclear weapons, despite the fact that they are sanctioned precisely because of this? This is because Iran ultimately see the achieved nuclear capability as the prerequisite to every single state of their existence. You cannot argue economy when you are in doubt over whether or not you can have an economy at all. Why is this important? Because ultimately, nuclear peace, the fact that there has not been a single nuclear bomb dropped on the world since Nagasaki, is precisely because of mutually assured destruction. And this is the status quo that we see among other nuclear powers. India and Pakistan, sure, they have spats, but they understand that they need to do diplomatic relations because both of them have nuclear weapons. The North Korea and the United States, even them to some extent, they understand they need to not bomb each other. No first strike policy only possible under MAD. What is the situation in the Middle East? You do not have MAD. Israel is a nuclear weapon, Iran is not. And so long as this is the case, Iran will always see the proliferation of nuclear weapons within their control as inherent to their survival. They will not care about the fact that their people are suffering. They will not care about the fact that the world thinks of them negatively because they see this as inherently the prerequisite to their existence at all. What are we going to prove then? What we are going to prove to you is that a nuclear Iran is the only pathway towards peace and stability in the Middle East. This is something that our opening has stopped at the fact that, you know, if you keep the status quo, if you keep hurting them, they will not be able to do harm. However, this is unsustainable because they have not provided an exit for the oppressed people of Iran. What about the women? What about it? If you keep hurting the Iranian government, they will not get better. And if you do not have a way for you to influence the Iranian government, you will not be able to influence them to be better in the first place. Now, you might say, but it has been possible before. South Africa, in the 60s, they were pursuing nuclear weapons, right? But they dropped it willingly after the world pressured them. This is no longer possible. Why? Because in the 60s, we live in a different world. Back then, the trend was towards nuclear non-proliferation. The START was signed between the USSR and the US. They agreed to reduce the amount of nuclear stockpile. It looks like we might live in a world where nuclear weapons does not exist back then. Today, this is no longer the case. The United Kingdom, the United States, Russia, every one of them is pouring billions into the development of nuclear weapons, into expanding their arsenal, and into just generally using them as a deterrent. So non-proliferation is a treaty that is bong. It is no longer something that rational state actors can rely upon. So now, if you are Iran, and you see Israel having nuclear weapons and you do not see them losing it in the future, you now understand that Israel does have the option of first strike because you cannot retaliate. This is the rational calculus. No matter how much you hurt Iran economically, they will always try to get nuclear weapons. So what is the framework then? The framework that we should use is just accept it. Iran will be a nuclear power. They will not abide by any other international treaty, JCPOA 2.0, because, well, they have already seen without nuclear power, these countries have no respect for their right as a state anyway. The United States, it is always just one bad election away from them pulling out of a treaty that takes decades to create. So now, why is it that when Iran becomes a nuclear power, you will more likely to have better conditions for Iranians? Because one, now the Western powers does have to think about it in more symmetry. Iran does have more power. They are more capable of destroying Israel and the West and its allies, so now they do have to negotiate. What would these negotiations look like? These negotiations look like, for instance, them saying, hey, Iran, you're in our list of state sponsors of terrorism. Can you please stop doing that? Maybe if you stop doing that, we will ease the sanctions, we will allow your goods to flow. And this is now, only under this situation, only when you move the goalpost from them not pursuing nuclear weapons to them just behaving better in general, can you have a productive discussion with Iran at all. And why is it that we do need to just drop JCPOA? Because you have to realize Iran does have capital. Iran does have an economy. Despite the fact that they have been out of the JCPOA for 6 years, despite the fact that the US have sanctioned them for 6 years, they are still fully capable. Look at Russia's war in Ukraine that is being fought by Iranian drones. They do have other allies. The Western world is not the only state actors that can interact with Iran. But now, when you say, okay, we accept you will become a nuclear power, but please can you behave better otherwise, you open up the possibilities for them to finally see the rational calculus. When they do not have to fight for their survival anymore, they can finally see, okay, if I say, for instance, make the laws for women in my country better as the Western countries make the prerequisite for trade with them, now I can see, okay, now I'm trading with Russia and China. But if I do this, I can now trade with also Russia, China, plus US, plus Europe, and now this is the only way by which the Western world, with its supposedly humanitarian values, can gain some sort of influence over Iran and make them better as state actors. Before I continue, any POI? So, we have established for you, this is a unique framing. This is a case where that only closing opposition has brought to you. Nuclear Iran, the only pathway towards betterment, the only pathway towards better humanitarian values. Why is this different from every branch here? OO stops at telling you that if you hurt Iran enough, if you could just continue the status quo, their harm will not be mitigated. However, as I have already explained to you, there is no exit pathway here. You are just creating a situation in which Iran and the United States will always be at odds, will never align, and will always continue in a perpetual state of conflict. This is not something that we want, because we have to recognize that Iran on its own and with its variety of non-Western allies is a country that is capable. Ultimately, when you do international relations, you must see the goal instead of the state actors. The goal here is peace in the Middle East, not a weak Iran. And it is a reality that must be accepted, that Iran will not just be weak, Iran will always exist, as they have always existed. They're a large country. They have technological capabilities, as we can see in action in Ukraine. And so ultimately, that differentiates us from OO, and this, I believe, disproves the entirety of OG's case, because, well, I have already shown you why the acceptance that they will become a nuclear power is the only prerequisite for all of their cases to run, for you to have influence through economy. Therefore, very proud to oppose.
Okay, we thank the opposition member for this speech. To close the government side of the debate, I would like to welcome the government whip. Here.
Hello, check, am I audible? All right, before I would like to start this particular argument, I would like to state to everyone that I'm no expert in geopolitical stuff, so I would like to say sorry if I do overgeneralize something, since, yeah, it's strictly for debating purpose only. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, the opening opposition should be debunked. Basically, the entire opposition side of the house should be debunked from this debate due to their generalization towards Iran being a bad boy towards everyone, and whatever they do, they will definitely be harmful towards the country, towards, yeah, basically our society as a whole. As the government whip, allow me to actually bring a couple of points, not points, actually allow me to bring a couple of couple of things that would support our position in this debate. Let's start from the arguments brought by the opening opposition. The opening opposition made an assumption that whatever it is, the worst will happen when China and Iran, well, basically they form an alliance, and it would create more war, it would jeopardize Middle East and basically ruin the tension in Middle East. However, this will not happen because, they said that it's going to happen because they have more resource now because we already lift the ban. However, this will not happen because we know that Iran is not exactly as bad as it seems. Iran actually cares about what basically Iran is not as it's not as bad as they try to frame it to be. They said something about that. If Iran has more money or has more resource, then definitely they will create more tension. No, thank you. They will create more tension in the world because now, we have money, we have a resource, we're going to create a weapon of mass destruction to basically empower ourselves to have a bargaining power in the Middle East. And by bringing China in, then it will happen quicker and we can take the fight to US. However, this is not going to happen because there are no real explanation from them how economical war can actually create basically a real war, because what China is here doing to Iran is basically giving them economical aid, or basically giving them economical aid to support them with their life, because now they're being sanctioned by the US. They're not going to basically just create a weapon or just because they assume that China is the eternal enemy of US. It's not going to happen. Therefore, the case should be debunked. Next, they said something that, thank you. Basically, we're going to bite the bullet here that yes, as stated by the closing opposition, yes, whatever it is, even if they have the money or not, Iran will definitely develop a new nuclear weapon, right? However, this will happen in our side of the house, but it's not going to be as bad as they think it's going to happen, because now under JCPOA, we actually have a proper check and balance to ensure that the development of nuclear weapon by Iran is not going to threaten the world as it happens. It's not going to threaten the world as they thought that it might be, because now under JCPOA we actually have a proper check and balance. We actually have some sort of let's just say guidance towards basically the Western country in this pact, the JCPOA pact. They will help Iran how to properly basically weaponize themselves, but in return, no thank you. In return, Iran will definitely in this particular notion, Iran and Iran and everyone in this world will be benefited from JCPOA, because now basically Iran will receive their bargaining power in the Middle East, because now they no longer have to be afraid because they don't have nuclear. They will be attacked by any other else. They have the bargaining power now, and we can ensure that. No matter what happens, even if Iran successfully develop this particular nuclear weapon, it's not going to be used to actually harm the world or basically retaliate to the US. They also said something about that, because they have money now, they can use this particular resource or money to retaliate to the US due to the lack of trust that happened in their side of the house. However, we do believe that if we didn't actually put this motion into this particular world, as stated by the closing opposition, since Iran will definitely still have nuclear, then no thank you. Then the sense of retaliation will be more apparent in their side of the house, because now they have been put through suffering under the sanction, because now due to the fact that Iran is shifting their budget towards nuclear, because they are afraid of the fact that they have any bargaining power. Now, because they live under such suffering under that sanction, Iran will definitely feel more, let's just say, motivated to actually create some havoc in the Middle East, attacking US allies and etc., because they live under the sanction. If we actually remove the sanction and basically imply JCPOA 2.0 as stated by closing opposition, this will provide benefit to both sides of the house, because now Iran can actually have nuclear weapons, but at least in our side of the house, they have nuclear weapons, but the fact that they have nuclear weapons will not threaten our world as we know it, because it is under check and balance or under a under a regulation of a certain pact, what we call as JCPOA. So And it will remove, or basically not remove, it will decrease the sense of retaliation brought by the Iran, because at least now they're aided, no thank you, they're aided by the JCPOA, by the West. So the sense of retaliation, that emotion, will not exist in our side of the house. Next, we talk about how CO come to this debate. CO stated something that peace and stability is what they try to strive, what they're striving for in this particular motion. However, imposing economic sanction is not the best way to do it. It's not exclusive. We do believe that by imposing JCPOA, we could actually create peace and stability, while everyone could while Iran and basically the west side of the world will live peacefully, under the fact that we're going to bite the bullet, and Iran will still have nuclear. However, the nuclear will not be threatening, will not be it won't create fallout, because now it is under a certain sanctioning body. So basically Iran will definitely still have nuclear. However, the nuclear will not harm anyone, or at least in our side, in best case scenario, it will not be as bad as it seems, as brought up by the closing opposition and the opening opposition side of the house. Next, we do believe that basically their concern is about if we have nuclear, then they were going to attack. However, without this particular without the particular capital to actually maintain those particular bargaining power, there is no use of actually having a nuclear without actually having the ability to, let's just say, sustain it. So therefore, we do believe that JCPOA should not be. We do believe that JCPOA should be put into action, and therefore we are proud to oppose. Thank you. Propose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, government member, for this speech. Government whip for this speech. To close the debate, I would like to welcome the opposition whip. Here.
If Iran can actually fund a lot of these groups, for example, like Houthis and stuff like that, I think we can also assume that they have a lot of access money for things like more development of nuclears and so on, even if they, for example, have sanctions. That's precisely why my member is going to take the bullet and assume the worst case scenario that we will actually have an Iran that will actually have nuclears. That's why my member's points are going to make sense. But let's look here first then. Why exactly is it that the deals, for example, the types of negotiations and stuff like that are actually going to happen much better under our side? My member has already mentioned to you then, when we actually have an Iran that actually has nuclears, then will other nations, for example, even like US, will actually take the Iran more seriously? What does this look like? This looks like, for example, actually having more discussions, negotiations with them, actually bringing them to the table to have conversations. Because what did this look like in the past? In the past, US has always, for example, had a bigger position than the Iran. So this usually what they do to other countries and so on, is that they weaponize their sanctions, their ability, their capital, and so on. And this, in fact, actually antagonizes Iran even more, which makes them more detached and closed off, which means that you will have less information, less media coverage, less scrutiny, and as well as no change, because they feel like they're only threatened, antagonized, and they are less likely to change. Why should I listen to you if you are not also trying to make it fair for me? If I'm not getting anything from this, you're just pushing me around. This is exactly how it's going to look like for North Korea, where you're actually forcing them to even be more closed off and detached from the rest of the world, and making discussions and stuff like this less likely. This is precisely how you cannot actually buy the benefits of OG unless you can actually have a more fair things like the negotiation and so on, where you can have more information and change and so on. But here, why is it likely that if we actually see this often, for example, like US weaponizing their sanctions and so on, because Iran and US are enemies given by the characterization and opening, which means that they're more like they actually push them around. And we also see this as a trend with other countries in the past, like for example, Venezuela and stuff like that. Whereas, so then it's more likely for us to, for example, US to learn their lessons because they used to be like super confident in the past, where because they're in the powerhouse and actually having the US hegemony and stuff like that. Whereas now they're actually going to have more negotiations. So what does this negotiation could look like? For example, when then you are actually in a more like equal footing and so on. No, thank you. You'll actually, for example, hey, if you, for example, make better laws and so on for women, we can actually decrease the sanctions. You could actually make better deals and so on. This is precisely only the way that you can, because in government side, the only expectation of Iran for you not to get sanctions is only and only if you stop the development, which means that having other types of policy changes, having like other countries like US actually asking them to change the or like have better humanitarian aid and stuff like that. Making policies for their people, paying more attention to their people, makes it so much less likely because the only expectation for you is to actually stop making and developing the nuclear, because one, it's unlikely for Iran to take up the deal because they first already feel like they're antagonized, they're pushed around, and they are less likely to take the deal because it feels like it's actually unequal at the very beginning, right? But here, no, thank you. But then, why is it then on top of these impacts, why you better negotiation for deals and stuff, but also the fact that it's more it's unlikely for you to also attack and conflict because of mutually assured destruction, as my member has mentioned, as well as all of these impacts. Why is it also then justified for Iran to actually have nuclear power? Why? Because my members already mentioned to you how they feel like it's survival. The fact that US can also take back their agreement to suddenly sanction them, which means that US is actually very willy-nilly going back on their word. So the only way that, for example, they can have survival or any self-defense is actually having this nuclear power to begin with, because it means that they actually have no choice but to do this, because otherwise things like this, if for example US has a different election, it could just be going back and forth between this. And I think the fact that we cannot really trust the US, which means that they are justified into doing these things at the very first place, because then this is their only way of being safe and actually having stability for their people, which means that, for example, I expected for me not to get sanctions, but suddenly they sanctioned me. I can also maybe pressure them hey, I thought this was an agreement, we're on equal footing, you cannot just arbitrarily do this to me. This is going to be much better, especially when you have economic negotiations with each other. This means that more likely that your economies are more tied together, which makes it less likely for you to want to do things like conflict, both from US but also on the Iranian side. But sure.
I think you need to wake up from your dream. How could you say that Iran suddenly have money due to the sanctions that were just being removed? Thank you.
I think from the characterization and the mention of how Iran already has money to fund the Houthi groups and so on, we can assume that they have more money, but then the fact that they feel the urgent need to prioritize this first, then other certain things in their country, means that it is likely for it to happen. But even if not, we're literally taking the worst case scenario under your side, but you cannot even prove your best case scenario. That's why we already win over government side. But look, then why is it also better for the people on the ground in general? I think when then your economies are more connected and so on, is that you will actually also have more in actual media coverage tried to brought up by OG, precisely that because you actually trade more and stuff like that, you know what's actually going on within the country, because because the only thing you're not asking, because in the past, you're only asking about the inspection and stuff like that, whereas now you could also, for example, inspect the way that you do your economy. For example, maybe if you want to trade with the EU, you actually try to have maybe I want you to increase better protection for your workers and stuff like that. I think have more regulations can happen more likely. We already explained to you how this is justified for things like survival, but we also explained to you how the impact can only happen when we have Iran that is on more equal footing with the rest of the world. For all these reasons, thank you.
Thank you, the opposition whip, for the speech. That is the end of this round. I would invite teams to cross floor, shake hands, and wait for the announcement. Good luck for everyone. Thank you.